Good morning, everybody. All right, we are now here at Luke 23. Uh, these these are tough for me to go through these. There's so much to go through, and I know we can't hit it all. And I know there's so much depth to Christ being on the cross. And so yeah, it makes it a little difficult to go through. But you know what? Let's go through. I know if you guys have read through them, I've already kind of seen obviously what's going through, but just want to pull out some incredible things that some little revelations here that we've seen. So let's get started. We have, all right, Jesus handed over to Pontius Pilate. Now then the whole multitude of them arose and led him to Pilate. So he just went through being with the Pharisees and they beat him up there. But now they're bringing him for his civil trial. But look at this. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar." What? When did he do that? Saying that he himself is Christ, a king. Now these people are Jews. They're supposed to fear God. They're supposed to want the truth. And they're creating this information absolutely just to put Christ on the cross. Now for our benefit, mind you. But it's absolutely interesting that they're creating this information, forbidding to pay taxes. Now it's true that he did say that he's Christ the king. But then Pilate asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered, "As it is, as you say," or "It is as you say." Now, let's look at the civil trial just quickly. So they go and they bring him to Pilate. Now, because we have to kind of look at all the chapters of, all the books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, to really put together what took place. He went before Pilate, and then from Pilate he realized, oh, he's not in my jurisdiction, send him over to Herod. So then Herod looks and he's like, I don't see any fault, send him back to Pilate. So then Pilate again sees no fault in him. So then he says, okay, beat him up and mock him, and then I'm going to set him free. But then after that, the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they're like, whoa, Pilate, if you do this, you're gonna be in treason. And so they threaten him with treason. So then he's like, okay, put him to death. And this is absolutely crazy. So we're going to see some of this, and then we're going to go a little further into it. But so then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, I find no fault in this man. But they were more fierce, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place. Yes, it's true, but he wasn't stirring up the people. Look, he stirs up the people. No, they were creating miracles. I mean, even Pilate and Herod, they wanted to meet Jesus. They wanted to see what he was doing because they heard about the miracles. So stirring up the people, he was teaching about forgiving others, and he was teaching about loving others. Yes, he was stirring up the Pharisees. He was threatening them, teaching throughout all Judea, and yes, that is true. But then when Pilate heard of Galilee, he heard them say, and look, beginning from Galilee to this place. Oh, you're talking about Galilee? He asked if the man were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he's like, oh, from Galilee. Okay, send him off. Because he did not want to be part of this. So he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at the time. Okay, well, that's kind of convenient. Herod was in Jerusalem. They didn't have to send Jesus off, because if Herod was not in Jerusalem, then they would have to send Jesus off to where he was. And this could have taken several days. It would have no longer been the Passover. But God had ordained that Herod be in Jerusalem at that time. Now, when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad. Isn't that awesome? For he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard of many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracles done by him. He's in a civil trial, and he's like, oh, that's awesome. Now, he also thought that Jesus was the resurrection of John the Baptist, whom he killed. And so, or that John the Baptist was resurrected. But isn't that crazy? He wanted to see some miracles done by him. So then he questioned him with many words, and he answered him nothing. Jesus didn't say a thing. I just want to read this 8, the very bottom of what Andrew Wommack said here. Herod desired to see some miracles done by Jesus. No doubt some of his questioning with Jesus made this desire known. This was in Luke 23:9. However, Jesus did not use his faith to do any miracles for Herod. And this is a huge point for us to keep in mind as a point of faith. Miracles are God's way of meeting the needs of those who seek him in faith. Miracles will sometimes be used to demonstrate God's abilities so that people may believe, but they will not happen to skeptics who are tempting God. And this is a huge thing. Miracles should be used to meet the needs of those who seek him in faith. And this is something that we ought to also keep in mind as we're ministering to others. Keep this in mind. It's to help others. But anyhow, he wanted to see some miracles. Of course, he was not going to be seeing any. And then the chief priests and the scribes stood and vehemently accused him. So then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. Now, this is very interesting because this robe is very possibly the robe that we see that the centurions and that the Roman soldiers were fighting for, that they cast lots for. So that this was the one that actually was given to him by Herod. Now, a lot of people often use that, Jesus was not poor, he was wealthy, and they use this robe as evidence that Jesus was wealthy. And of course, Jesus had all his provisions met, and they had, even had somebody taking care of the finances for him. Not saying that he was poor, but this robe, though, seems like this is the one because it was really gorgeous. Arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, that this is probably the one that we see them casting lots for. So anyhow, that very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for previously they had been at enmity with each other. So they had something in common. They also had something in common with, kind of with the Jews. They were really just doing this for the Jews. This wasn't something that was common for, they were trying to free him. So then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, he said to them, so now he goes back to Pilate. So he went to Herod. Luckily, Herod was in town. And now he sends him back to Pilate. And he said to them, you have brought me this man to me as one who misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. And neither did Herod, for he sent you back to him, and indeed nothing deserving of death has been done by him. So both see that nothing's been, not deserving of death. Look at this. I will therefore chastise him and release him. How hypocritical. He was doing this just because he feared man. If he found him to have no fault, then why is he chastising him? Why are they going to beat him and mock him and then release him? Well, that's not right. For it was necessary, or what we'd seen as not a just judge, for it was necessary for him to release one of them at the feast. So he was looking for any reason to release Jesus. And so they all cried at once, saying, away with this man, and release to us Barabbas. Now, Barabbas, I just want to read this little portion here that he writes also. What happened to Barabbas is a picture of what happens when a person becomes born again. So Barabbas was guilty, as we were. Jesus was innocent. Yet Jesus suffered the death that Barabbas should have experienced, and Barabbas went free. Likewise, we were all guilty and condemned to death. In Romans, it talks about this. Yet Jesus suffered our punishment so that we might go free. Just as Barabbas didn't ask for this substitution, So God commandeth his love towards us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Barabbas was freed, but he had to choose whether or not to accept this new start and remain free, or go back to his old ways and come under the judgment of Rome again. Likewise, we all have been freed through the substitutionary death of Jesus, but we have to choose whether to accept our freedom by putting faith in Jesus or to reject him. And I like we had mentioned in previous videos, I like that song by Josiah Queen about I am Barabbas, just showing that we are the same. And so it's so easy for us to, absolutely, point our fingers at what they're doing, but yet we are in the very same boat. So then this Barabbas, who had been thrown into prison for a certain rebellion made in the city, he had done a rebellion in the city and then for murder. Pilate, therefore, wishing to release Jesus, again called out to them. But look at this, how crazy it amplifies, because then they shouted out not just for the death of Jesus, they shouted out to crucify him. This is like way more than just death. This is an excruciating pain. And so why did it go so crazy? Well, obviously they were being stirred up by Satan. They were being stirred, but they were being led right into the prophecy of what Jesus had done. Let me just see. Oh yeah, in verse 20, I just wanted to also point out, see, Pilate therefore wishing to release Jesus. Remember, it was his wife who had a dream about Jesus. And so here, she warned him. So he's looking for any reason. But now they're calling to crucify him. So he said to them the third time, why? What evil has he done? I found no reason for death in him. I will therefore just chastise him and let him go. But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified. And the voices of these men and of the chief priest prevailed. They also threatened him of treason, as we said. And so let's go look quickly at John 19:12. Here it is. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, if you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. So they were threatening to bring him to Caesar and to say that he's committing treason. And so then Pilate's like, obviously now afraid for himself, he's like, okay, all right. So Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they requested. And he released to them the one they requested, that's Barabbas, who for rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison, but he delivered Jesus to their will. Absolutely crazy. Now, we see this. This is also one of the only times that we see here what takes place. Now, as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon of Cyrenian. We see further that the Simon guy, his sons actually become part of the church. And so this is pretty cool how this took place. He was probably, I don't even know if he really knew who Jesus was. He was coming to, he probably might have heard of him, but he was from a totally different part. And so he was traveling here. And so now he gets chosen. And on him they laid the cross that he might bear it after Jesus. And a great multitude of the people followed him, and women who also mourned and lamented him. So here some women are following, but Jesus turning to them, look at this, during this time, O daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. Now he starts going into saying, hey, he's starting to prophesy about what's going to take place with Jerusalem and how it's going to be torn in or taken down in 70 AD, just a few years later, 35 years later or so. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, blessed are the barren womb that never bore and breasts which never nursed. Remember, there's like 1.1 million Jews that were killed during this time. And they were saying to themselves, man, it'd just be better if we don't have babies, because some 97,000 of them were taken as slaves. 1.1 million were killed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do these things in the green wood, what will be done in the dry? This is now talking about himself. See, green wood has life. And so he's saying, if they're going to do this to me, which I have life, then what will be done to Israel, which doesn't have life at this point? It's a dry wood. And they were also 2 other criminals led with him to be put to death. And so they were also, but look at Jesus, just his selflessness, how he turns to these women and he talks to them. Well, don't weep for me. In fact, this is going to be a good thing for you. And when they had come to this place called Calvary, and this is actually the only time where it's called Calvary here in Luke, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right and the other on the left. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And they divide his garments and cast lots. Look at this. This is such, he's practicing what he preached. Because we see here, where was it? I think I might have missed a few things. But what verse are we at? 34. Okay. Matthew 5:44. We see here that he says, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. And here, in the midst of what's taking place, Jesus takes that time to actually practice what he preached. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And of course, these Roman soldiers, they're just doing what is being told of them. But they know he's innocent. These guys all know. But they're doing it because, well, they're being told, but also it's prophesied. It needs to be done. So they divided his garments and they cast lots. And the people stood looking on. But even the rulers with them sneered, saying, he saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming and offering him sour wine. And then they said, and saying, if you are the King of the Jews, save yourself. This is actually amazing, because Jesus was not on the cross. He was not going to save himself. He was on the cross to save us. And so I heard it said, I think it was in Enduring Word, he had such a beautiful thing. He said, it wasn't the nails that kept him to the cross. It was his love for others that kept him to the cross. It wasn't the nails that held him there. It was his love that held him there. And that is such a beautiful picture of what Jesus did. And an inscription was also written over him in letters of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. This is the King of the Jews. Now, so they were, mocking Jesus, but this is actually the truth. The truth was shown on the cross, that this is the King of the Jews and the King of everyone. But, what an incredible thing. They thought that it was a mockery, but it is actually a truth here. Then one of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed him. So why is this guy blaspheming Jesus? He also, I guess it was really deep in his heart to fear man. So he wanted to do what the others were doing. So here he's blaspheming. He's about to die. He's got nothing to live for. And he's blaspheming Jesus. He wanted to be with the crowd. He wanted to fit in still. Fit in with the crowd, even though they're killing him. If you are the Christ, save yourself and us. But the other, answering, rebuked him. Wow, look at this. Do you not even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive this due reward. He's saying, yeah, we're here justly. We're receiving the reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. And then Jesus said to him, so then he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. So he's asking, just to be remembered. And Jesus said to him, assuredly, I say to you today, you will be with with me in paradise. So this paradise that he's talking about, we believe, and there's a lot of the commentators that believe that this is the Abraham's bosom that we see where the saints are being held until Christ releases them. And so that very same day, yes, he was there in Abraham's bosom. But I just want to read to you some of the things here. 41, verse 41, what Andrew Wommack writes: the reaction of the whole world to Jesus was symbolized in these two thieves. Interesting thought. Some of the world mocks and others embrace Jesus. Those who mock are damned, and those who receive Jesus enter into paradise. What a simple and clear choice. Yeah, put it said, it's pretty basic. And it comes down to that. And then also in verse 42, he says, this man didn't confess his sins, as it is so often the instructions the church gives to sinners today. It's not the confession of our sins that produces salvation, but the confession of Jesus as our Lord, as it said in Romans 10:9 and 10. This man confessed Jesus as Lord and asked for his mercy. Luke 22:43 reveals that was enough to save him. And this is so beautiful. And what an incredible, just to see how he's like, you're going to be with me in paradise here today. And so then he saw him just moments later. They are now in Abraham's bosom together. And so Jesus spent some time in Abraham's bosom with the saints and instructing them and telling them what has happened and what will take place. That was while he was down in Abraham's bosom for a few days. Now it was about the 6th hour that there was darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. So this was from the 6th hour is noon, 9th hour is 3 p.m. And then the sun was darkened and the veil of the temple was torn in two. So the darkened, we know, according to when I was looking at April 3rd, 33 and where the moon was, etc., this was not an eclipse that took place. There was a supernatural darkness that took place. In fact, it was even mentioned so dark that they could see the stars. And the veil was torn in two. And so here, as we've mentioned, it was absolutely massive, this veil. There was no way. But interesting thing is that the veil was torn in two from top to bottom, not from bottom to top. This thing was like 60 to 90 feet tall. And so it was God who ripped it from heaven as opposed to man ripping it from the earth, its way up. And when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. The first Adam, God breathed life into him. And now we see that Jesus, the second Adam, breathed his last. And with this breath came the victory. This is so incredible. So then when the centurion saw what had happened, he glorified God, saying, certainly this was a righteous man. The earthquakes going off, all this taking place, the darkness. And then here now he's like, absolutely, there was no denying that he was the righteous man, that he was a Christ, and he glorified God. And the whole crowd who came together to that sight, seeing what had been done, they beat their breasts and returned. And this was like just this absolute, what was it that it said here? This smiting of their breasts was a way of showing how deeply they were affected. This expressed great sorrow and possibly fear. Some awesome physical signs, such as the earthquake and darkness, were associated with Jesus' crucifixion, and this made even the Romans quake and recognize God's presence. Imagine that. To the extent that it was taken. But all his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. Now behold, there was a certain man named Joseph, a council member, a good and just man. Look at this. He had not consented to their decision and deed about crucifying Christ. He was from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who himself was also waiting for the kingdom of God. So he had been waiting. And I bet you he stood with absolute wisdom, stood by watching what Jesus was doing, seeing the miracles, not asking for the signs like the Pharisees were doing, asking from signs from heaven, but he was seeing the miracles as signs. And he was listening to the word, and the word was doing something in his heart. So then he went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. We see that he asked for it boldly. So then he took it down, he took his body down, wrapped it in linen, and he did this with Nicodemus. They did this together. Laid it in the tomb. It was hewn out of rock, where no one had even laid before. So that was a day of preparation. Remember, we talked about the day of preparation when the lamb was to be killed, and this is when it was taking place. But look at this. And the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how his body was laid. But then they returned home to go and prepare the spices and the fragrant oil, but the time was now too late. They couldn't do this anymore because it was Sabbath. I'm forgetting here my words. But anyhow, and they rested on the Sabbath. So then they had to rest on the Sabbath, so they couldn't come. So they came, it was the morning after the Sabbath that they came to prepare and to anoint his body, and that's when they saw he was gone. But remember, Jesus' body was already anointed by Mary, who had come with the fragrant oils before, when she was doing that, when Judas was when he was ticked off that she was spending all this money on him. And so he had already been anointed. Anyhow, what a crazy time. I love this. To me, it was absolutely huge, because there was a time when I asked God, I was like, hey, how was it a sacrifice when you knew that he was going to be raised to life again? And he just really put in my heart. He said, it was a sacrifice because if he had sinned even once, not only would I have lost my son, but I would have lost absolutely everyone else. There was no plan B. This is the thing that made me fall in love with Jesus so much. There was no plan B. There was no other son. There was the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Those three. And so without Christ, if Christ had sinned even once, there was no way for us to be saved, because there wasn't another son and another son and another son that they would have kept on coming. And so to me, this was the absolute beauty of the cross. And like I said earlier, I know I couldn't do it justice as to what Jesus did on the cross for us in speaking this and taking place. But really what took place in my heart was realizing what Jesus did for us. And since that day of what he showed me, I have ever been so thankful for him going to the cross and facing all of that and taking the sin, because that was actually the incredible thing that he took, was that he departed from God. He had to forsake, or God had to forsake him in all the sin that he took. Now, luckily, he had no sin, and this was, he was able to come and raise again. Had he had sin, man, we'd all be pooched. And so anyhow, I hope this was a blessing to you. Absolutely, yes. So hard to comprehend the depth of his love for us, as it was mentioned in one of the comments. So true. Anyhow, God bless you guys. I hope this was a blessing for you guys, and maybe something that came out that maybe helped you guys see something in a different light. But be a blessing out there. Remember, we got an incredible day. Be a blessing to those around you. Value others, because Christ did this for absolutely every single person. So, all right. Love you guys. Be a blessing and stay filled up.